All right, welcome back into Live Impact News. We move forward with our primary election coverage. We kind of went over the results, just the foundation of what actually happened, and now we welcome Dr. Eric Claville to maybe break down a little bit more of the why what happened. I think maybe we'll start with that 2nd District congressional race. Elaine Luria has been a multi-term representative in Congress. She was unseated by Jen Kiggans, took an election cycle off, and now is back running to reclaim her seat, and she wins that Democratic primary with 80% of the vote. Your initial reaction to an expected result?
Yeah, well, no surprise there. Elaine Luria, of course, former Congresswoman representing the district that she's running for re-election in, won the Democratic primary hands down. But of course, when she announced her candidacy, even before that, she received major endorsements from 2 former governors, Governor McAuliffe and former Governor Northam, also both U.S. senators, and several other congresspersons as well, mostly in the Democratic Party. With that being the case, that secures a lot of funding, that secures a lot of energy, and a lot of mobility as it relates to campaigning. So is again no surprise. But what I also saw, even though she had at least 1, maybe 2 candidates that really put their names out there, were in their communities on the ground. What we saw to happen in Congressional District 2 is that voters decided to go with experience. We not only saw that in Congressional District 2, but also in a district in Charlottesville. Tom Perriello, who was the former congressman there, he also won re-election. But when you look at Virginia, and you look at, and we'll talk about more of the national landscape later, Virginia has seemed to be more of a moderate state, and also more proven leadership as well. But even outside of that, Congressional District 2 is very important because when you look at the seat itself, since 2008, that seat has flipped several times and has become the most purple district in Congressional District in the Commonwealth. And when you take a look at 2008 to now, ironically, the control of the party of the House of Congress aligns with whoever wins that seat. So it's going to be a very exciting election from a political scientist standpoint, looking at the trends and the parallels that are there, but even more importantly for the voters, because now they're voting for 2 women who are proven in that seat, 2 who have military leadership, military careers, and 2 that have 2 different philosophies on how to approach representing and advocating for Congressional District 2. And we'll talk more about those issues later.
And sticking with District 2, I mean, you already touched on it. This is an absolutely pivotal race here as Democrats look to take back control of Congress. These sort of swing races are the ones that they need to win. Is it possible? I mean, could you make an argument that this is the single most critical congressional race that we have coming up in November?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, the parallels, when you look at from 2008 to now, of who controls House of Congress and who wins District 2, it aligns perfectly. But not only that, but when you take a look at the failed referendum, now, Connor, the referendum seems like so decades ago, right? But that's the reason why.
What was it, late April?
Right.
Seems like years ago.
But that's the reason why we're having primaries now, so late because of that. But when you take a look at the referendum really provided an opportunity for current incumbents, especially in the Republican Party, to have a viable chance to run effective race and secure re-election. But as it relates to Congressional District 2, and a little of 1 in the district in which Tom Perriello, in Charlotte, the seat of it is Charlottesville, where he won the Democratic nomination. District 2 is the most important because it flips, and it's very, it is very closely aligned with our military, and not just our military, but the military actions of Washington as well. Right now, we know that the conflict in Iran is one of the most pressing issues in the country and really in the world when you look at gas prices and the like. But when you also take a look at our district here, Congressional District 2, a lot of veterans live in that area, but also active service members. So for a lot of members who, family members, they were out at sea and serving and coming home, and they got the notice that they're going back out and they're serving right now over in the Strait of Hormuz and in that part of the world. I mean, that's a strain on family. So they are remembering that. But not only that, but also kitchen table topics, Connor. Gas prices. Gas prices are back up again. And not just gas prices, but also when you take a look at grocery prices, the amount of goods and services, the increased cost there, the start of school supplies. All of that plays a major part in how voters view the individuals who are representing their interests in their communities.
And we know, you mentioned that referendum. We know an immense amount of resources were poured into that race. We expect it to be the same with this second congressional district. Are you able to sort of guesstimate just how much money we may see put into this race by not just individual donors, but establishments in both the Republican and Democratic Party?
Well, I will say that this race will raise millions of dollars, if not over $100 million within itself. But it will be the most expensive congressional race in the Commonwealth, hands down. It will be in the multi-millions of dollars that are spent for this one seat. Because, again, how vitally important it is as it relates to control of Congress, as it relates to the current power in Congress and the president's agenda, which we do know that Congress, both the House and the Senate and the White House, are controlled by the Republican Party at this particular time. So what happens? What happens if the Republican incumbent, Jen Kiggans, Congresswoman, is reelected? Does the president's and the White House agenda continue in the direction it's going, even under the pressure of constituents? Or if they are defeated and the Democratic incumbent, the former Congresswoman, recaptures that seat, what happens there? So, will there be a referendum on the president's agenda, the White House agenda, and how far will the Democrats go, depending on how far of a margin that they have both in the House and if they also could capture the Senate? And that's a very interesting discussion, especially given what's happening in Kentucky with Mitch McConnell, and also here in the Commonwealth, where we have former governor and senior Senator Mark Warner, who was running his last reelection for his seat in Congress. In the Senate.
His last reelection after a long time spent representing Virginia in the Senate. And you alluded to just how high the stakes are in more ways than one for this election and for these midterms. It lends itself to the preponderance of resources that we mentioned as well. That also means that we'll be seeing a lot more ads, and we know that in the modern political landscape, that oftentimes means more attack-based ads.
Absolutely.
We know that both Jen Kiggans and Elaine Luria are very strong candidates with strong resumes and backgrounds, especially for this area. We want to look at the flip side of that. When you look at Jen Kiggans, when you look at Elaine Luria, what are the weak points of their campaigns, of their candidacies?
Well, right now, it's really not the weakness of the candidates, because both candidates have very strong platforms themselves. They have very strong resumes themselves. That's why they were elected as the Congresswoman representing that district both twice. However, the weaknesses of their campaigns will be their parties. And it will be the issues that their parties are advocating for and who is the face of that. On the Republican side, of course, we know the face of the Republican Party, the party of MAGA right now, is the president. A very large personality that towers not just on Washington politics and local politics, domestic policy, but also in the world, especially with foreign policy. And no other issue speaks to that than the conflict and the war in Iran that the president has gotten our country engaged in, and the backlash from it. Now, the other policies are, we think about DOGE. We talked about the referendum earlier, but DOGE seemed like, if the referendum seemed like decades ago, DOGE seemed like a millennium ago. But there are still families that are reeling from the job layoffs, the sudden layoffs, in Washington, and also institutions that are feeling the effects of those cuts from a labor standpoint, services standpoint, and also a funding standpoint, especially when we look at universities and the shifting of research dollars and the like. And then again, lastly, economics. According to the Raging Cajun, James Carville, it's about the economy, stupid. It's always about the economy. Kitchen table topics. We talk about the referendum. Connor, you and I, of course, your fellow journalists, my colleagues, we talk about these things, and because that's what we're involved in. But the average citizen, the average family, they've forgotten about it for the most part because it's not impacting their daily lives right now. But what's impacting their daily lives are the increased costs, the inflation, and also future plans as relates to education and also workforce development. Now, on the other side, the Democratic side, of course, Democrats not being in power. However, we see now across the country, you see younger voters, more millennial voters, and some of what we call the progressive side or the extreme side of the Democratic Party. They are now forming their platform, and it's being labeled a socialist platform. Of course, now the Republican side, they're jumping on this and pushing this as a negative toward America, a negative toward what we have here is capitalism. And they're also pushing it as a turning America toward a communist type of country and laying examples of where this has not worked in the world. It has worked in some areas, but where this has not worked in areas that we would consider westernized or industrialized countries. Now, with that being the case, it's catching hold. It's catching hold and galvanizing their base, their voters, to get to the polls and vote against this and vote for their candidates. So when you take a look once again at what's happening nationally, it's really the party agendas from a national standpoint and kitchen table topics that I believe are the weak points for both candidates.
And I want to stay with what you were just mentioning about the Democratic Party, because it strikes me as though they now have a difficult balance to walk here, which is that, well, I guess I'll leave it up to you. Do you think for moderate Democratic candidates like we have here in the Hampton Roads area, do you think that they will maybe spend more time trying to refute that socialist Democrat, that social democrat label that is being applied to the entire party by conservatives and Republicans who are campaigning? Or do you think they will maybe try to adopt some of that wing of the Democratic Party in order to galvanize the farthest left portions of that Democratic base, or try to fight back against it to get independents to come out and vote? It strikes me as going to be a very difficult balance.
Well, to your point, it really all depends, right? It all depends on where you're running. All politics is local. So even though we are a commonwealth, collectively, we are individual communities, and which is why we have different types of representatives representing various parts of our commonwealth, whether it be the Hampton Roads region, the central part of our commonwealth, or Northern Virginia, or in the southwestern part of the state. Every community is different. With that being the case, I believe that when you take a look at the Democratic agenda, when you talk about local politics, we have a unified government here in the Commonwealth. The Democrats control the executive house with the governor. They control the General Assembly with the House of Delegates and the Senate, and they also control the Attorney General's office as well. Very similar to what's happening in Washington. So what the Democrats here could do, they could run on, number one, what's happening here in the Commonwealth and the policies, positive policies that were passed for citizens, especially under affordability. Affordability is a major talking point and a major issue and a lightning rod on the federal side as well. So when you look at the message of Democrats, if they're listening, free consultancy here, focus on affordability, focus on the very opposite of the Republican Party from a White House standpoint and policies. Now, what they would have to do in the alternative, they would also have to look at what's happening nationally in the negative side, the socialism side, the progressive side, and peel back and really campaign on the positive side of that particular agenda from the national party. Now, keep in mind, that's a voice that's rising, very similar to the Republican Party where the MAGA voice started rising. The question becomes, will they have a candidate and will it have a platform to be the overarching message? Right now, when you look at the extreme side of each party, it is not a majority, but they represent enough in districts in order to push the lever in the direction of the one that's carrying the mantle. So when you take a look at what's happening here in the Commonwealth, I don't think that message would take hold. I don't think it would be a hard battle or an obstacle, difficult obstacle for the Democrats to overcome, but they have to be strategic. They have to coalesce around a unified message and ensure that the voters, their base, understands where they want to represent the Commonwealth, not just here domestically or locally, but in Washington as well.
And we know that out of those 4 primary candidates, obviously, as we've said, Elaine Luria won with 80% of the vote. Dr. Neela Devanath did get second with 16% of the vote and sort of positioned herself as that progressive candidate. So you wonder if maybe that is a factor as well. Let's move to the 1st Congressional District. Yeah. 7 primary candidates running for the opportunity to take on Rob Whitman in November. Rob Whitman, a longtime representative from the 1st District. Let's start here. 7 primary candidates. Yeah. Shannon Taylor wins with 53% of the vote. When you see 7 people aiming for that seat, what's your impression of a race that's that crowded?
Well, the first impression is that when you look at that particular district, Congressman Whitman, he is, as you mentioned, a long-serving, so he's a staple in that community. But there is an optimism, especially nationally, that these districts are not as safe as they profess to be, not now with the policies that are gripping our nation as a whole. So with that, you have a lot of individuals that are vying or see an opportunity to vie for the spot to run as the Democratic challenger. And this challenger will be a viable challenger as well. I believe the Shannon Taylor, who came out on top, I believe, again, no surprise there because she's run before. She ran in a race and positioned herself, and voters became very familiar with her. But also, she received a lot of support as well because of that previous race in which she ran. So with that being the case, Connor, I think when you look at the 1st Congressional District, it's going to be a very, very interesting election. Again, the incumbent is popular. He's long-serving, and he is also the typical congressman for the Commonwealth of Virginia. He's a moderate as well. So with Shannon Taylor, I believe she's a moderate candidate also. So it's going to be a discussion of, in that district, who do you want to represent your interests in that district in Washington against the federal policies and not so much the state policies because their personalities and their record is very similar.
You mentioned how since 2008, we've seen the 2nd District flip-flop back and forth. Since around that 2008 time, it's been totally uniform in the 1st Congressional District. And Whitman is regularly winning over 55% of the vote. But based on that answer, you feel like it might be a little closer this time around.
Absolutely, especially when you look at the outgrowth of part of that particular district. Look at Williamsburg, James City County, Gloucester, the more populated areas in that particular district. You see that, and also New Kent, that particular area. You see a lot more voters, Democratic voters, that were in either Hampton Roads area or that were further north of Richmond that have moved a little further down or further up in Hampton Roads, and they've taken population in that particular district. So with that being the case, I think that will make it very interesting. But also the message. What will happen on the federal side? Right now it's projected that Republicans will. Right now there's about 90 some odd seats in place, 70 really. Is looking at a swing possibly of real good chance of Democrats gaining seats in those areas, in those particular districts across the country. So with that being the case, it's really going to hinge on not so much local politics, but the federal message and what happens in Iran, what happens with affordability, what happens at the gas pump, and where we will be as a nation in the next several months. 90 days, can you believe it?
90 days. That is genuinely astounding. That means not only is it 90 days till the election, but it's 90 days till November. Just in general, we're cruising right through 2026. We've already touched on it quite a bit in our discussion about Virginia here, but I want to go, big picture. We know that in Michigan, Abdul El-Sayed defeated Haley Stevens for that Democratic nomination to run for the United States Senate in Michigan. This was a race where an immense amount of resources were allocated to Haley Stevens, both by donors such as AIPAC and also from the Democratic establishment. She had the backing of those more moderate Democrats like Chuck Schumer, whereas Abdul El-Sayed had the backing of Bernie Sanders and other progressive candidates. It seemed to be yet another reflection of where the Democratic Party may stand and where it may be headed. And maybe that reflection or maybe that future is here now when you see an election like that. The next question becomes someone like Abdul El-Sayed, some of the candidates that we have seen achieve success in Colorado. The next question is, can they defeat Republicans in a general election? Right? They've been able to have some success in Democratic primaries. How does that translate to a race against a Republican candidate? Any insight or any thoughts on how you see those races playing out, the progressives versus the conservatives?
I believe it really depends upon the state and the state of affairs. About a decade ago, if anyone spoke against any policies that were passed by Congress or wanted to pass for and on behalf of Israel, you were deemed an anti-Semitic or you were deemed not to support Israel. Well, that's not the case anymore. Because primarily a lot of the country and the world don't agree with how things proceeded in the Middle East with us, with our president and the president or prime minister of Israel and their approach to the Middle East conflict, as opposed to being a defender, but more so being an aggressor. That's taken a lot of momentum. So we're seeing it more up close and personal also because of social media. Not only are we just relying upon journalists and news stations, but we're relying upon point of view, first-person point of view with social media. So people are seeing those things and they're speaking up, again, not in opposition to our support for Israel and other allies in the Middle East, but in the approach and the policies that are passed. Again, the approach and policies not against the countries themselves and our long-standing support. So that's taking momentum. The second issue I think we see in a lot of those states is, once again, the checks and balances of government. One thing about democracy, we have checks and balances. Thomas Jefferson, all the writers of our great guiding principles of our Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the like, we see checks and balances. We see how democracy works. A lot of individuals believe that the controlling party, Republicans, have abrogated their voice, and there are no viable checks and no balance to government or balance to the approach to create policy. So that's the second thing I believe that is taking hold and getting a lot more volume in those particular states. And then lastly, I'm going to say it again, it's all about the economy, affordability. So if things are not affordable, it doesn't matter what policies you create. It doesn't matter, what you say you will do. The question is, what are you doing for me? Not lately, but now. So I believe those are three of the major issues: the conflict in Iran, in the Middle East, and the process and how we got there. Secondly, when you look at affordability, but then also our democracy. Checks and balances. Will each side have their voice and speak their voice on behalf of the people, or go in lockstep with the controlling party that is in office at the time, no matter which side?
No shortage of talking points headed into this election season, and no one better to join us and talk about those points than Dr. Eric Claville. We appreciate you being here. Is there anything else that you want to add before we let you go?
Well, as always, one of the great things we have about our country is one person, one vote. Make sure you register to vote so that you can vote in your locality, local elections, state elections, and national elections. It is the greatest voice that you have to speak up and to tell our representatives what you believe and how you want them to represent you. So go register to vote, take your friends, take your family, and engage in the political process.
Very good. That's civic duty, especially in those elections where your district is electing a congressperson, a real true voice for voters here in the Commonwealth. Dr. Claville, we appreciate it. I'm sure we'll see you again before long. Like you said, 90 days.
90 days.
It is almost time.